Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Boogeyman is coming? Just kidding, he's already here. On today's episode of Central Booking, I'm talking mayhem, monsters, and movie villains with award-winning author Tim Waggoner. With more than 50 novels and 7 short story collections to his credit, Tim is as prolific as he is pragmatic when it comes to writing. His newest release is the official novelization of Halloween Kills, the blockbuster film starring Jamie Lee Curtis in which Laurie Strode continues her epic battle against Michael Myers. Evil dies tonight, or does it? Having written across genres including horror, dark fantasy, YA, and media tie-in, Tim has also blogged about writing and published articles on the subject in magazines such as Writer's Digest, The Writer, and The Writer's Chronicle. This culminated with the 2020 release of a critically acclaimed nonfiction book, Writing in the Dark, which recently won the author a Bram Stoker Award, his second of 2021 and third overall. It's no surprise that Tim is as skilled at preaching the craft as he is at practicing it. In addition to his impressive body count, or body of work that is, he's a full-time tenured professor at Sinclair College in Dayton, Ohio, where he teaches creative writing and composition. But today's lesson is on the house. So turn on some lights, lock your doors, and get ready for a scary good time. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. Today, I am speaking with award-winning writer Tim Waggoner, who is the author of the official Halloween Kills novelization, and also Writing in the Dark, it's pretty much an indispensable resource to writing dark fiction. So we're going to talk about both of those things today. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to have you here. So I wanted to ask you first, we'll start with, some questions about Halloween Kills. And for people watching, if you haven't seen the movie yet, this will be pretty non-spoilery. So, don't worry about it. But I just wanted to ask you how your involvement in this project came about. Were you approached for it? Is it something that you went after? How did that work?
Well, I'd already done several original tie-ins for Titan Books, who's the publisher of the novelization. I did some supernatural tie-ins for them, and I also did several other novelizations, and they just approached my agent and wanted to know if I'd be interested. And I was like, hell yeah, I'd be interested. So yeah, I was thrilled.
That's a great invitation. I was going to say, who would say no to that?
Right.
That's pretty awesome. So we're recording this a bit early. By the time people see it, the book will actually be out. I have to admit, I haven't read it myself because it doesn't come out for a couple more days. But I have started listening to the audio because for whatever reason, that dropped early. So I've gotten a taste of it. I've seen the movie. And if I heard correctly last night when I was listening, I think that this book is dedicated to Jack Martin, who wrote the Halloween 2 tie-in book way back in 1981. So I wanted to ask you about that and why you wanted to honor him, with this book in that way.
Well, yeah, Jack Martin is a pseudonym for the horror writer Dennis Etchison, who's one of my favorite writers. He's a great guy. Passed away not too long ago. But I remember reading articles about how he wrote all of those tie-ins. He talked about the creative process. He talked about trying to make them really good books in and of themselves. And I had never read his novelization Halloween 2 because I never could find it. But I got his novelization of Halloween 3 and Videodrome and The Fog, and I loved them. And I did manage to find, it's probably pirated, I don't know. I spent $5 on eBay to get it. It was just a PDF. But I really wanted it because I wanted to get a sense on how he wrote, especially from Michael's point of view. Right. So I could go ahead and kind of take some instruction from that. So yeah, that's the reason why I did it. I mean, he did like Halloween 2. He didn't do the first Halloween novelization, and I'm doing Halloween Kills. I didn't do Halloween 2018, so I thought that lines up really well. So right. Those are the reasons why I dedicated it to Dennis.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, and I love those sort of small world moments where there's somebody that you admire and then you realize that you have this tie to them that you probably never expected would have happened. So that's pretty cool. And I thought I'd ask you too, you talked about how they came to you with the opportunity to write this book. So I'm wondering what your relationship was like with the Halloween franchise before you wrote this book, and if that at all influenced your approach to the project. I don't know if you were a hardcore fan or not, but I figured maybe you can talk about your relationship with the films.
Sure. Yeah, I saw the original in the theater when it came out. I was probably, see, if it was 78, that would have made me about 14. So No, wait. Oh, that's right. Trying to do the math. I'm 57. So yeah. And it was back then, we hadn't seen, we just meaning like, people in general,
Right.
big audience hadn't seen movies like that. I mean, they existed, of course, but it's not something that you would see in like just your neighborhood theater. It might be something you'd see like at midnight in kind of a grungy theater somewhere where you'd see like The Hills Have Eyes or something, or Texas Chainsaw. And so when I saw this, the suspense was so intense. And it was when I learned to enjoy it on a whole new level, because right in front of us, I went with my sister's boyfriend, and right in front of us were young women who were screaming at everything. And it was just so wonderful. It's like being on a roller coaster with everybody, a bunch of people, not just yourself. And it was, I still remember, how quiet it was. Sometimes I still remember the music. I remember different shots and things. So yeah, I've been a Halloween fan ever since. I've seen all of them. I own all of them. I really enjoyed the 2018 movie. I was very jealous of John Passarella because he got to do the first novelization. I'm like, oh, so I was so excited that I got to do the second one. But and over my shoulder, like different with all my other weird figures, are all my different Michaels. So
That's awesome.
they were around my computer when I was writing the book, so it kept me company.
Okay.
But yeah, I loved Halloween. It's Michael's probably my favorite, or at least one of my favorite kind of movie. If you can call him a monster, I would call him a monstrous figure, because he inhabits this weird realm between like, is he real or is he supernatural? And nobody ever knows. Just when you think he's like normal and he's just a regular guy, he gets up after 5, gunshots or whatever.
Right.
And that was, that ending was so powerful originally when the first time everybody saw it, because yeah, he kept getting up in weird ways, like, just reactivated almost like a robot.
Right.
But it was still believable. And then when it hit that, it was just like, oh. And then that ending where it's, we see all these shots just of Haddonfield, and you hear the breathing get louder and louder, like he could be anywhere. Yeah, it was fabulous.
Yeah.
So I've loved Halloween forever.
That's awesome that it's so really must be thrilling to, be involved at this level now. And I have to say, Halloween is one of the few movies that sort of shaped my love of horror. I didn't really come to it until much later. As a kid, I was terrified of like everything, including my shadow. And then I watched Scream and I was like, oh, maybe I like being scared. So it was Scream, Halloween, and the beginning and ending of When a Stranger Calls, the early movie. Those were probably the three that shaped my love of the genre. But there's just something about that first movie. It was so brilliantly done. Like you said, I love the ending because it's like, where is he? He's nowhere. He's everywhere. You just don't know. But my next question to you, you mentioned John Passarella, who wrote the 2018 novelization and did a fantastic job with that book. I interviewed him last year around this time, around Halloween time, to talk about that. And, he told me that really all that he was given in terms of the story was he got a copy of the script, and I think he got like a cache of all the production photos, and that was pretty much it. And he never even got to see the movie. He wrote from the script and from the photos. So I was wondering what you were allowed to access so that you could really get into the story and inhabit it.
Now I'm even more jealous of him because all I got was a script.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Then usually that's when you do a novelization, that's usually all you get. I mean, you don't get to see the movie ahead of time. I did once when I did the novelization of Kingsman: The Golden Circle, but it's like, super, super rare. For some reason, the director decided I had to see the finished movie so I could put that stuff in with, I'd actually seen 2 other scripts. And so I cobbled it all together from various things, but it's the only time that I got to see a movie. I mean, you almost never do. And so, yeah, all I got for this was a script. And, but the advantage I had was it's a sequel to a movie that I had seen and I owned and I could watch over and over, to get a feel for the style, to get a feel for the kind of that particular world, that particular, iteration of Halloween. So, and John didn't have that. So having the pictures must have helped him a lot. I mean, I had images from that first movie to draw on.
Yeah, it is nice that it's, later that same night. So, you have the setup, what people look like and what they're wearing.
That's right.
It's funny. I was going to ask you if you got lucky. I know that, Halloween Kills got delayed for a year because of COVID. So I figured maybe you were privy to, seeing it early, but I guess not. So
nope. Didn't hear a word from him for a year.
Wow. Wow.
And that's pretty normal.
Sure. So, all right. So let me ask you then, How do you attempt to balance what's given to you, in a script where you have a story, but then sort of your own ideas as a storyteller? And I guess the word I want is instincts as a storyteller. So how do you balance what they give you with what you foresee with the story? Because you sort of have to flesh it out. I know that a script is very heavy on, dialogue, description, direction, but that's pretty much it. So you have a whole canvas that you have to flesh out. What's your process like to sort of marry the two?
Well, the first thing I do is, I go through and read the script just for the story. And if I have any ideas at the time, I'll make notes for scenes that, oh, this would be cool to expand, or I can see like it'd be cool to stick a scene right in here that might make a really good transition or develop a character a little bit more. And then when I go back through it, I do even more of that. Then I sit down and type up all the dialogue. Just type it up, because without attribution, without anything else, because that has to go in. And then I start writing things around it. It's the only time I do like this weird kind of writing around the thing. I try to take images from the script, and even sometimes like bits and pieces of description, because I want the screenwriters' voices to come through too. Because when you do this, it's like doing a collaboration with people you'll never meet.
Right.
Sort of a time delayed collaboration, because you can't change things back and forth, bad ideas back and forth. And then one of the things I do is I try to go ahead and get a feel for and again, because it was a sequel, it's a lot easier to do this, a feel for the world, a feel for the storytelling style. What kind of Halloween story is this? Because when you look at all the different Halloween movies, none of them are exactly the same.
Right.
And so how does this one grow out of the first one? And then, try to make it your own story within those boundaries. Like you are. It'd be like almost like being the director of a play. The play exists, and it's other versions of it have existed. But as a director, you want to bring your own, vision of it to life. And so then you have to go ahead and make these characters your own, and make like Michael your own, and make Laurie your own. So yeah, I'm drawing on all these years and years of having these characters, be something that I've enjoyed and lived with. But then in the end, even though it's a novelization of someone else's story, you have to kind of make it yours, but without like changing things. You can't change stuff. I can't decide that, Michael is supernatural and I'm going to put all this background in about, you can't do stuff like that. But make it yours in the sense that, when you're writing it, you're kind of living it, imaginatively living it,
Sure.
as opposed to just like being a passive observer and watching it. You have to also get inside the heads, like you're an actor at that point.
Right.
Like you're the character, you're thinking these things, you're feeling these things, you're doing these things. So getting into their heads is pretty important. And this iteration of Laurie was so well drawn in the last movie that was really, wasn't that hard. Some of the characters, like the returning characters from the first Halloween movie, the ones who are kids and the nurse, there's more about them in the script in terms of just kind of their background and how they are now. And that helped a lot, because otherwise the movie, this particular one, followed the script. It wasn't a lot different. It was just small details like that, as always in a movie, probably for time, they just don't have them, but they helped a lot for me to kind of flesh those characters out. So that helped a ton in being able to try to imagine like I was acting them, like I was in their heads.
Sure. And so, sort of to follow up on that, I mean, obviously, whenever you submit a manuscript, there's editorial feedback and then you revisit it. But when you're doing a tie in, what is that process like? How many people are looking at the manuscript? Is the studio going over it? How many people do you get notes from for a book like this?
It really depends. Usually you have an editor at the book company, um, at least one. You may have a copy editor too, probably, who may be separate. And then there's somebody at the studio who's in charge of looking at licensed products. At least one person. I had two editors for this book. And one of them, she was a really big Halloween fan. So she's like, let's seed in all these little references to other movies and things. And so if you see any kind of weird Easter eggs, aside from the silver shamrock masks, because they're in the preview, so it's not a spoiler to talk about those. But that was already there. But anything else, other references to Halloween movies, pretty much, those are things we sprinkled in there, little tiny ones. And then I don't know how many people at the studio looked at it. Right before they delayed it, they had announced there was going to be a novelization. And they didn't say I was doing it, but they announced that it was going to be there. And I saw a couple people on social media from the studio say they had read it. And so
Okay.
probably there were more comments than normal. They just went to my editor and then I got them, but I didn't know who did them.
Sure.
They didn't really have a lot. The stuff I added, they liked. Anything that I fleshed out or added, they were fine with. Um, I did change a little bit of the dialogue, which I've done before in other novelizations, because if you get a script, you give it to an actor and like a line of dialogue is just the word no 3 times.
Right.
Make each of those no's very different, but I can't do that, on the page. So I would make it one no. And things like that. And all they did was say, make sure the dialogue is exactly word for word like it's in the script. It's the only time I've had anybody do that. So I said, sure, change that back. Other than that, there weren't a whole lot of revisions that I was asked for. Sometimes it can go a lot different. For the Kingsman novelization, they gave my editor one script and me a different one, and they didn't tell us. And so when I gave my editor the book, she's like, what the hell is this? And then she realized her script was later than mine. So I had to revise my book entirely. And then the director decided I had to see the movie. So I had to revise it after that. And like I said earlier, I decided to make it a version with all from all 3 of the scripts, just the stuff I liked the best, like the greatest hits of these 3 scripts. And they were perfectly fine with that. So it's kind of a crapshoot how much freedom they'll give you. You just never know. But like I said, there wasn't the notes for this one. They weren't too onerous at all. You don't have a lot of time for novelizations. I had like a month to write
Wow.
Halloween Kills, and I wrote it in 3 weeks. So then I had a week to go over it. And I had COVID at the time too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was so sick. It was not a terrible case, and it was really early on in the pandemic. So, it wasn't until later that I got tested for antibodies that we knew for sure, but my doctor was pretty sure that my wife and I both had it. So it gave me something to distract myself, that was for sure. So I'd be sitting at the computer like with a fever or whatever, and waiting for my medicine to kick in and writing.
But so that explains Michael's delirium.
Exactly. So if you read this thing and you're like, wow, it's just kind of mentally odd, and that's probably why. But the whole thing went pretty fast. I think the copy edits took a lot longer because by that point they knew they were going to delay the movie, I think.
Sure.
But I didn't have any extra time really to work on the book. And, it's not like they said, oh, we're changing this and that, so change your book. Once it was done, it was done. And I just had to wait then. I was glad they didn't announce me as the writer, because that way nobody was emailing me for a year and a half or whatever, asking me, what's happening and tell us this. And so I got to watch all the people theorize online, and like, I know what the answer is. So that was a lot of fun.
Yep, that kept up a bit of the mystique. It's kind of funny though, having that year delay. You guess you could have written it healthy and well rested, but nobody knew. But I'm glad to hear that you and your wife came through that okay. That's a lot to go through, and then to have to deliver a manuscript in a month or less. But kudos to you, I guess. See, this is a professional. This is how it gets done. COVID doesn't stop it. You're kind of like Michael Myers. Nothing stops him. Nothing stops you.
Well, to be honest, too, a novelization's easier because you've got a script, which is like a very detailed outline. A lot of that material goes in. So writing a novelization, it can be faster than making up all your own stuff for an entire book. So they're easier to write in a shorter amount of time.
That's very true. At least the bones are there.
Yeah. Right.
So I think you mentioned, so you have seen the final film now, correct?
Yep.
So I just wanted to ask you, you said, from what you can remember, there aren't a lot of changes, from the book that we're all going to read to the movie that we've seen. Is there anything that you can recall, that was different in your version versus theirs?
Well, the script had a little, like I said earlier, it had a little more background about like Tommy and Lindsay, and I can't remember the nurse's name, Loomis's nurse. So there's a little bit of background of them, a tiny bit more character things like that, but they were small little character things. But, it fleshes out that a little bit more about Big John and Little John. I was actually worried they were going to cut that out, because the other scripts that I've read for my other 3 novelizations, it's the character stuff they cut out the most, because they have to keep the action and the other stuff. And like I tell people, at least from the scripts I've seen, the writers, they do put that stuff in there. When you don't see character stuff like in an action movie, it's not because it wasn't there in the
Right.
script.
Cut.
They do that, which is great because in a novelization, then you get to read that stuff. So there's a little bit more of that. Um, there was a little bit more of, I don't want to give anything away, but
Sure.
there's another mental patient in the story of the movie, and there's a little bit more about kind of his background and kind of how he got from point A to B and what's going on with him. It's just a little bit more. But when I watched it with my wife, she had not read the script and she had not read the book. I kept telling her, this is the first time I've seen a movie based on, that I wrote a novelization of that's almost exactly the same as the script. I was really surprised. I was expecting there to be, significant changes, at least some.
Right.
Especially because I read like an interview with the director who said that they came up with a new ending at the last minute and it wasn't in any script. And I'm like, I watched the movie and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, the ending goes on slightly longer in the script, but it doesn't change a single thing
Right.
at all in terms of the way it ends. So I'm like, I guess I don't know. It was in my script pretty much. There maybe just a little tweak here or there. So it was really cool to watch because it was like knowing everything that was going to happen and never being wrong. Because usually I know what's in the script and then I watch the movie and I'm like, nope, they changed that, they changed this.
That's right.
They
You
added
think you
that.
know it.
Yeah. But in this case, it wasn't like that. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I think I read a similar interview with the director, and he said that they did film something else that they thought about tacking on to the end, and then they said it would have made sense for the movie singularly, but not for where they're going, in Halloween Ends. So I think they're gonna do an extended version when it hits Blu-ray and DVD. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, intrigued. So, and I will say too, I've been listening, like I said, to the audio, and what I love about these novelizations is you get a bit more nuance, in depth, in texture, and even in, listening to the first few chapters, there are some minor differences, from the movie that we see, but you get to live in it in sort of another level because, in a movie, you've got 90, 100 minutes to get it done, whereas in a book, you have, like 300 or 400 pages. So I love that it's almost a more immersive experience. And speaking of immersive, I wanted to ask you, and you mentioned this briefly before, but how do you, endeavor to get into, we'll call it Michael Myers' jumpsuit? He's such an iconic character. So how do you, get into his head and sort of capture his essence?
Well, part of what I did was just, I've lived with that character since I was 14. So, 43 years, maybe, whatever. And so I just have a lot of impressions of him from the movies and just from his presence in pop culture too. And because he is in that weird liminal space between the real and the unreal, he's always fascinated me. So, I've already got that to draw on. Watching the movies again, I watched the original and then I watched the 2018 one and I skipped the others just because, that they weren't part of this timeline. And then later on, I think I actually, during the writing, did start watching some of the others just to stay in the Halloween mindset. So that helped a lot. And then, seeing how the script, how he's portrayed in this particular script. I read John Passarella's novelization to see how John handled him too. And then, like I said, I read Dennis's novelization of the original Halloween 2 from whenever it was, 1980, whenever they did it. And that helped a lot. And then what I tried to do is, you can't get into Michael's head. You're never going to have, it's a great day to start killing people today. I can't wait to do it. You're not going to have anything like that. So, one of the things I use as my touchstone is that speech that Loomis gives in that first movie, where, I spent so many years trying to, get him out, and I spent years trying to keep him in, and, there's nothing in there. He's got the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. And the way he describes him is you try to do that too. It's like he's a force as opposed to a person. And so I wrote him where I get a little bit sort of into his point of view, but it's more like he's almost like a shark. Like, sharks they are what they do. It's just stimulus and response with them. And so I did that and stayed in the moment in those scenes without trying to trying to walk the fine line between real and unreal.
Right.
Like it's not a spoiler to know that he gets out of the fire because
Right.
that's how you get the movie, and plus that's in all the previews, you see that. But it's not easy for a person to survive a house fire. And so I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna, and the script was very clearly walking the line, between. And I'm like, okay, I got to walk this line too. So how in the hell, if Michael was just a regular person, how could he survive a fire? And so I did a ton of research. I found out that, like, if it was a modern house, like built after 1960, he'd have died because of the stuff, the materials we use produce noxious, like gas that'll kill you. So Laurie's house looked old, and I'm like, good. It's just going to be wood. He's not going to die from that. The script was clearer about, like, when the firefighters are shooting water onto the top of the roof, that it's breaking through and coming in. Right. I'm like, okay, I have him walk through some of that, Sure. And then even then, he probably wouldn't make it if he was a regular person, but I figure that's close enough.
Sure.
So things like that, all of those kinds of things helped in terms of trying to get into his point of view. The biggest thing to do with you when you write these is try to forget that there are, like, who knows how many people are going to read it, but there are a ton of fans that every single one of them have their own idea of what Michael Myers is like. Sure. And so you can't please all of them, or you have to do yours, because it's you've been given that job. It's your version, your interpretation of Michael. And hopefully I've already gotten a couple emails from people that have listened to I don't know how I came out early, but who've listened to the audiobook. They seem to think I did a pretty good job. They like those scenes. So hopefully, they were my favorite to write. Those and scenes from Laurie's point of view. Right. We're getting to write both those iconic characters. It was great. But hopefully I did a good job. We'll see what people think.
Oh yeah, I have to say, the first scene, I think, in your novelization, I absolutely loved. It's not in the film, but it's basically, it's Michael immersed in the fire looking up, and he sort of locks eye contact with Laurie, and he talks about, this woman and her stubborn eyes. And I thought that was just such a great scene, because it gives you a bit of an insight into how he actually, perceives her. And it just continues beautifully from the first movie and the first book. And no, it is not over. And he is, in those flames looking back. But what we were talking about sort of lends itself to what I wanted to do, is to tie the discussion into another one of your recent books, which is Writing in the Dark, which is a nonfiction book on the craft, really a tutorial sort of for writers. And one of the things that you mentioned in this book, a mistake that writers sometimes make is that they try to over-explain their boogeyman character. And in doing so, they can sort of lose the essence of that character, or the fact that there's fear in the unknown. And one of the interesting things I think the new filmmakers have done with Michael Myers is they've sort of brought it back to basics, and they're not trying to explain away, what he does by... There's no weird mythos here, it's not part of a cult or druids or anything like that. So I'm just wondering, you're sort of in this interesting space where they're back to basics, and you get to see Michael as sort of a humanistic killer who maybe is a bit more than that. So I'm wondering if you can, talk about how your idea that you write about in Writing in the Dark applies to writing that Michael Myers character, especially now that they've done away with sort of a lot of the backstory.
Yeah, and I can see how Michael evolved like that over the years, because if you're not going to do the same movie over and over again, you want to do something different. The temptation is to add more. I mean, right. Even with the second one, it's like, oh, hey, wait, Laurie's his sister. There's stuff that gets added to the mythos, and eventually that stuff just weighs it down, and you end up losing the core essence of that made the character so effective in the first place. And so with Michael, I mean, it's really clear in the very first, the 78 movie, it's super clear that he's an enigma that cannot be explained. He can't be. I mean, even Loomis at the end says, yes, it was the boogeyman. As a matter of fact, it was. Right. Who knows what the hell Michael is? There's no way to know. And that's the kind of thing that makes Michael so intriguing, I think. And, he wouldn't be the same character without his mask, because the mask hides, anything inside him. I mean, he could just still walk around and kill people without his mask, but, he would not be the shape at that point. He'd just be a guy. So, yeah, I think that whenever I try to think of the most effective horror, I try to think about what would it be like for people if they really encountered something. And, they're not going to do, I mean, they do it on Supernatural, because it's not horror, it's adventure. They hop on the internet, and there's the handy web page with all the background and rules of this monster they have to fight. And, you would encounter something like this, it would be a great mystery. I mean, think of all the stuff in just our own lives where we don't understand other people's motivations, and we may never know why suddenly they stop talking to us. And we're supposed to figure out this weird, crazy, monstrous force that we've encountered. So I think that that's a big part of where the fear comes from. And if you're going to tell a story, even if it's not really going to scare people, but it's based on fear, and it's the fear story that entertains them, I think the unknown is a huge part of that. And I think you do make a mistake. I also think people crave the explanation because it makes the horror safer and it gives them control over it. I think that's also the reason why we make our horror icons into dolls that are cute, like the things behind us. You know, we're trying to defang them as fast as we can.
Sure.
And so if you see something that's super scary, that it really affects people, they will very quickly start to parody it. They'll you know, like the weird thing about the Babadook suddenly becoming like a gay icon.
Right.
Just because it got mislotted in Netflix under, like, you know, gay and lesbian,
Sure.
you know, theme stuff. And it's really funny and wonderful to have that. But, you know, that was because the Babadook was pretty damn disturbing when it came
Right.
out. So so I think that that's part of what the filmmakers over the years, whether they meant to do it or not, they were making Michael into something that can be understood, and that means safer for people.
Right.
It's like how they turned Freddy Krueger into a comedian after the first
Sure.
movie. You know, I mean, he was terrifying in the first movie, but after that, you know, they start making him not so terrifying. And I think it's a common reaction, and I think it's a mistake to have your whatever your horror is be super explainable, especially if it's got a supernatural element. In the book, I talk about Sinister, which I love that movie. I think Sinister is such a great movie, but I just hate that they go to the college professor instead of the internet. You know,
Right.
that was like the internet before the internet, was go to the college professor, the folklore professor, who's like, oh, well, there's this God and whatever. And you're like, okay, great. I mean, it's still a little, you know, mystifying. Maybe you don't know exactly what this God is, but it's much better that there's just this damn thing, whatever it is, that just does this horrible stuff. Um, so it didn't really destroy the movie for me by any means. I love that movie, but it was almost like just hitting a false little note. Like it's the one note
Right.
on the piano that, you know, it's out of key. So I do urge people to try to keep a sense of mystery going in your horror. I think it's one of the most effective things about horror, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of that so far. You know, I don't. Hopefully, in the third movie, they're not going to explain everything. I remember the novelization of the Friday the 13th movies. They did 1 through 6. A writer named Simon Hawke did them, and I loved them. They were great. But in there, in order to explain how Jason doesn't die, he basically gives him Wolverine's healing power. He makes him a mutant with healing power. And I'm like, well, that's a cool idea. But then I was like, now, wait a minute. Jason's more effective because you don't understand what the hell's going on with him. He's just a force like Michael. Um, no finesse at all,
Right.
but still, you know, he works great. So yeah, I think it's an important thing to do, important thing to try to avoid.
Yeah, I love that they've sort of gotten back to that, and the unexplainable is sort of scary. Even in Scream, when Billy's like, "Well, we don't need a motive. Motives are incidental." That he has a motive, but it is pretty terrifying to think that these people would be doing this for no good reason. Or to bring it back to Halloween Kills, and not a spoiler because we've all seen it in the trailer and the teasers, but basically Laurie Strode trying it to explain it away and just saying the more he kills, the more he transcends. And yeah, that is kind of the essence of Michael. The more he does this, the more he does it, the easier it gets. We see that sort of all throughout the movie. But again, in sort of keeping with the context of writing in the dark, I wanted to ask you too, about some of the lessons contained within the importance of creating sort of multi-dimensional secondary characters who, even if they're going to be dispatched, you want to sort of make some kind of connection, with them. Like obviously we have the Strode women here. We have Officer Hawkins, who I love that we've gotten to know a lot more about. We have the Elams, even like you mentioned before, Big John and Little John, and I think they were hysterical. I think Big John, Little John is like the new Marco Polo. you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
But I'm wondering if you can talk about, developing sort of that ensemble cast around Laurie and Michael Myers, and also the importance of the setting, because Haddonfield really comes alive in the movie and in the book, and also specifically the Myers house, both the old version of it and sort of the new version.
Now, I think it's important for just not only for good storytelling, but so that the audience doesn't get numb to the killings. These are you want people to feel like these are real people and their death is a loss. It's not just like Michael scoring another point, like in a video game. And so you do that by, even if they're only going to be on stage for a little while, is trying to portray them as much as you can as, a well-rounded character, so the audience has some kind of empathy with them. And then, when Michael takes care of them, they're done. We feel for them. And, maybe you don't be angry or hate Michael the way you would for a character like in Scream. Somebody has a motive that you can understand and you can go ahead and hate them. I don't know what you would do with Michael, just be afraid of him, because I don't think there's anything personal, in what he does necessarily by any means. But yeah, I think it's really important. And so the script did, and the movie didn't do it. It's still not really a spoiler, because it had, like I said, it had more about some of the characters. And sometimes I would build a little more too, just so that the all the people that Michael might encounter and take care of, even the firefighters, I got a chance to go ahead and develop some of the firefighters in that early scene a little bit more than that was in the script. Script had a little more than the movie, but I did even more than that, because I just don't want them to be people that are like video game, like NPCs that just get mowed down. And yeah, the setting of Haddonfield is really important. I mean, look what happened when they took Jason to Manhattan. And
shot him into space.
yeah. Well, I love that one. My brother and I went to go see it in the theater, and the woman at the ticket counter wouldn't sell us tickets because the movie was so bad.
Oh my
we
God.
had to convince her we wanted to see it on purpose. And so she made us promise that in 15 minutes, if we didn't like it, she'd give us a ticket to any other movie. She couldn't fathom why somebody wanted to go see Jason in space. I'm like, I've been living for this movie. Are you kidding? But seeing Jason in Manhattan, he looks so small. He's just walking around all these other people. He's not like alone by himself in the dark in the woods and maybe only with a victim next to him. There's a whole crowd of people. And it just changes the dynamic so much. It changes like the myth image of these characters isn't just what they look like. It's where they are. Dracula's in an old castle somewhere, and the Frankenstein monsters roaming around the hills, wherever, in the castle too, but roaming around these villages and things. So I think it's really important that, you try to portray in this story, whether it's the novelization of the film, that you do have Haddonfield be a character too. And I like the fact that they were in the first movie and this one, I mean, between Laurie and then the people of Haddonfield, it's like, what would it be like to be known for this kind of thing? In one of the Friday the 13th, the Crystal Lake, they changed the name of the town because they got sick of being known as, this is where Jason's from and all these murders. And I think that, there is that kind of maybe collective trauma, but also, they didn't really go into it in this movie, but I can imagine some people, being kind of proud of it in a weird, sick way and maybe trying to make money off of it, selling Michael souvenirs or whatever. So it feels like real world, like the way people actually do. Have a fascination with these kind of things, or a whole community could be traumatized. Sure. Maybe not so much 40 years ago in that world because only a few people died, but Michael killed 30 or 40, who knows how many people,
yeah.
He killed in this movie. So yeah, I mean, whoever knows how many years down the line, and they're supposed to jump 4 years ahead for the next movie. So that gives Haddonfield 4 years now to have a collective trauma about, that night that, which is so much greater. It's almost like, and I can't remember if they said this in the script or I made it up, but because I read the script a year and a half ago, but it was almost like what he did before was like dress rehearsal for what he did, like practice. Because first he kills one person, his sister, then he kills a few people when he's like 25 or whatever, and now it's like tearing up a whole town pretty much. And so, I thought about that kind of thing too, is the progression of it and what effect it can have. And I think all those things are really important. It gives the world a feel that it's a lived-in world. But like I said, it also, the whole thing is part of the myth image of characters like this. The Loch Ness Monster's in Loch Ness.
Right.
Bigfoot's in the woods. All of that's part. The UFOs come and get you somewhere where you're isolated. They don't like land in suburbia and pick you up. It's all part of the story. It's all part of the image. And so it's really important.
Yeah, no, that's a great thought, because I think sometimes we forget how important all these things are working together until one of those elements are gone. And that's when you notice it. And of course, at that point, it's probably, too late. So I guess to move beyond Halloween, if you don't mind, if we could just
Sure.
talk specifically about writing in the dark for a little bit. I did want to ask you, one, what inspired you to write a nonfiction book on craft? And also, though it's targeted sort of specifically at people who write, horror or dark fiction, I think there are lessons to be learned in here that could benefit any storyteller. So I'm wondering if you can talk about its broad appeal as well.
Yeah, I was inspired because when I first started wanting to be a writer or thinking about it, like about seriously thinking about it, probably about 18 or so, I was still living at home when I was in starting off college. And my dad came home from work one day and he handed me a copy of Writer's Digest. And he said, I saw this on the newsstand. I thought you might be interested. And I'm like, oh, cool. My dad thinks I could be a good writer. It's just a subtle thing, but maybe if you're
Hey,
really good. And I was on the front porch, it was warm out, and I sat and read that magazine from cover to cover. And I was fascinated by all the different ways people talked about writing, the insights that they had, the tips that they had. And I kind of fell in love with writing about writing at that point. And the fiction columnist was a mystery writer named Lawrence Block. And I loved his columns. And then later on, his books about writing.
right.
And so, I always had in the back of my mind that if I ever learned enough and I felt like I had anything to share, that I would love to do that. And, I also love teaching. I became a teacher of writing because I love writing so much that I wanted to have all kinds of writing in my life. But I like helping people a lot too. And so over the years, as I, found ways to try to understand writing better so I could help other people understand it better, eventually, I accumulated a lot of stuff. I started a blog about writing. I didn't know what to make a blog about. And Jason Sizemore at Apex Books, I was talking to him in a convention. He's like, you're a teacher and a writer, write about writing. I was like, okay. And so my blog's been going 10 years and I had generated enough bits and pieces of horror about how to write horror. I would turn them into like workshops that I do like at conventions. Sometimes I might turn them in the workshops into articles that I publish somewhere else. I just generated a lot. And eventually I got to the point where that I had put together a presentation about writing horror overall. And I was like, okay, I think now I've got enough stuff to maybe build a book from. And I'd always loved the few books on writing genre that I could find, writing fantasy, writing science fiction, a couple horror ones that I found. I love those things. And so I just thought that, this would be the time to do it. I'm not getting any younger, I'm not super old, but you don't want to wait forever.
Sure.
And, in terms of its broader appeal, I mean, any kind of fiction writing still, there's so much that overlaps. You may do it a little bit different for this genre or this genre, but so much of how you structure a story, so much of how you create characters, how much of how you do scenes or layer scenes so they're, multidimensional and all that. I mean, yeah, that can apply to just about anything. So if you read a book on romance writing and a book on horror writing, you'd still find a lot of overlap because they're still fiction.
Right. And I have to say, too, I would probably consider myself more of a reader than a writer because when it comes down to the choice of the two, am I going to write today or am I going to read today? I will probably, pick up a book 99 out of 100 times. Um, but what I love is it's not only invaluable to writers, but as a reader, it's very illuminating. And as I'm reading this book, I'm starting to think about story differently. I just read this book and I'm reviewing a book and I'm thinking about that book in a completely different context, having read your book. So it's interesting. And I like that because it expands your horizons. But so you brought up the topic of teaching. I know that you are a veteran teacher, and not just of horror, but of general fiction. So I'm
Right.
going to open Pandora's box really quickly. I figure why not? But let me ask, in your experiences and opinion, what of the craft of writing can be taught versus what might be intrinsic to a person? And then how does discipline or tenacity or practice sort of factor into somebody's potential for success?
Those are great questions. Um, like a lot of people will tell you who teach, you can see, you can feel when people have a sense of language and a sense of story. And I don't know how to teach anybody that. I've never found a way. I found a way to be able to get to direct people's attention toward this technique or that technique, how to strengthen this or strengthen that, how to tap into what you already have. And so, maybe somebody right now has, X amount of writing ability, but they can take that ability and they can hone it and sharpen it to whatever degree they're going to get to. But then they can also train it on different types of writing. They could try poetry, they could try nonfiction, they could try different types of fiction.
Right.
And so you can learn those things. Like you can learn in general, here's how you write a poem, or in general, here's how you write a how-to article. So you can teach people different writing tasks that then they can, through practice and getting feedback as they go, grow even more. And yeah, I think that tenacity, I usually call it psychological toughness overall, because you have to deal with rejection and bad reviews. I've only seen two little ratings so far of Halloween Kills on Goodreads. One's 5-star and one's 2-star. And I'm like, well, it begins, it's just the way, the way it always is.
Sure.
And you have to, the people that can develop that for whatever reasons, however they get it, they're the people that keep writing. I've been amazed over the years of people that I know who are either like ungodly talented in terms of writing, who were never able to bring themselves to do anything for various reasons. And then people that did great, but just one thing came along and it discouraged them and they stopped.
Right.
It's not uncommon for people that go through MFA programs to, once they graduate, never write again.
Right.
Because the programs are so intense. I've met people that have gone to Clarion. It was the same thing. Once they got done, never wrote another thing. So the psychological toughness, that persistence is huge. I just saw somebody on Twitter today say you should never compare yourself to other writers. Just try to be better than you were the day before. Try to be the best you can. My freshman comp teacher, she was a teaching assistant, but at our last conference, I was able to in my journal write fiction if I wanted to. And so she saw some of that and she just said, you write really well. I urge you to take your writing as far as you can. And it's the best advice I ever got, because she didn't say there was an end point. She didn't say sell 1 million copies and make $1 million. She didn't say win a bunch of awards. That I should take my writing and keep going. And that's helped a lot. And when there are times that, like in every writer's life, there's a lot of ups and downs, just like anybody's, any profession, that in the down times, that helps a lot. Because even if for whatever may be happening, I can still take my writing the next step, whatever that may be. And so it's the one piece of advice that I keep passing on. I wish I could find her on social media. I've looked for her, but maybe she has a different name now or something. I don't know. Maybe she's not on social media, but I'd love to tell her that one little thing she told me changed the whole course of my life.
Yeah, I'm sure she would love to hear it too. How often do you not hear when you've made a difference in somebody's life? And that is great advice. Just something so simple, but so poignant. And I may come back to advice momentarily, but I did want to ask you too, something I'm really enjoying about this book is how interactive it is, or can be, because at the end of each chapter, you give exercises that people can try. And I think that they're really not as tedious and tiresome as some of the ones that you find in other writing books. So can you talk about the interactive elements between the exercises and also the appendices that you include at the end?
Yeah, that one of the things that I always hated about a writing class, loved writing, what I would hate about a writing class or books about writing is the dull exercises. So I tried to make them exercises that if you didn't feel like writing them, you could still think about them, and so you could use them any way you wanted. And I tried to also make them different, like, so they weren't always just sit down and write a few sentences.
Right.
That you would try different things. I tried to think about ways to explore different aspects of writing. And the appendices I put in, there are some of them that it occurred to me that I could create some tools that might help people, like flesh out the psychology of their characters. Dealing with pain's a huge deal in horror, whether it's physical, psychological, spiritual pain. So I had a pain questionnaire for how does your particular character respond to different aspects of pain,
Right.
just to kind of help people think through those things. I'm doing a follow-up. It'll be out sometime next year. That's just the Writing in the Dark workbook. It's full of exercises. So hopefully, I was surprised how many people like the exercises. I was afraid they'd just look at them and say, oh, that's just filler. I'll skip over those. So I'm really glad to hear that people found them useful.
Yeah, that's terrific. I read a lot of books on writing, and that's usually the point where I skip to the next chapter. And that hasn't happened at all. They are terrific exercises. And like you said, even if you don't want to sit down and write, they're very thought-provoking, and you can have that dialogue in your head. And another thing I really like about this is that not only are you offering your own advice and guidance, but again, at the end of each chapter, you sort of present words of wisdom from a who's who in the horror and dark fiction world. So I'm wondering, why was it important to you to present opinions other than your own? And then were there any, takeaways that you've taken away from reading that advice specifically?
It was important because I think that the creative writing education is often modeled on like an apprenticeship model. And that can be good because you can learn from a person, but it can be bad if you only learn from that person. There's so many ways to do things and so many different points of view and perspectives that the more people you can learn from, the better. And there's just, if you're in a field for a long time, you know a lot of people, or at least you know some people to reach out to. And I was like, I think that part would be really interesting for people to hear different voices, and hopefully sometimes they'll disagree, or other times they might back each other up. Um, and that's really the reason why. It was so my perspective, even though, probably there's a lot more of my words in there than anybody else's, it's still a significant chunk of the book. And I wanted it so that my voice didn't predominate and overwhelm other types of advice. Plus, it's just one of the things I loved so much. I mean, I learned just as much from reading interviews with the writers as I would like a how-to book, because they often would talk about their craft or talk about their perspective on stuff. It's one of the things I still love about following all kinds of writers on social media. I don't care if they're new writers, or I don't care if they've been doing it for 100 years. Them talking about what they're experiencing, what they're going through, and their perspectives on things, and how their perspectives change. I've just always found it really valuable. I just wanted to include that. And I did the same thing in the workbook too. There, I just had people focus more on craft tips and on the exercises they wanted to present. So some of the same, names come back, some different ones this time. So and I was glad to see how much people liked that part too. I wasn't sure that they would. So that makes me really happy.
Yeah, that's great. So as I start to wind down, I always ask people, in terms of a creating or writing life, a creative life or a writing life, what is the best advice that you've ever gotten, and then the best advice that you never got and had to learn for yourself? So you told us, not too long ago, that probably the best advice you ever got was to take your writing as far as you could.
Right.
So now that, you've been doing this very successfully for many years, and sort of reflecting on your career, is there anything, that now that you wish you'd known earlier, but sort of only learned through the experience of doing the actual writing?
Yeah, I'm starting to see people to give this advice every now and again online, but I'd never had anybody say it. Is that that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. It is the accumulation of a lot of things. When we hear about writers, sometimes it's just in the movies and TV, and the script writers have no clue what it's like to actually write books. Some of them do, of course, but most of the time it's just imaginative. It's like you write one thing and suddenly you're famous. And so it creates unrealistic expectations that way. Plus, there are ups and downs, which you hear about, but it doesn't prepare you to go through it. And my very first novel contract fell through. I don't know why. They made an offer on my book, and right before we went to contract, they just said they were no longer comfortable with the book and pulled it. I asked my agent what that meant. He said, "Doesn't matter. Who cares? Just move on." Because he said, things like that, ultimately, you can't read anything into them.
Right.
This is just what happened. And I told a friend of mine, Gary Bronbeck, about that. And he said, "Oh, you're so lucky." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "The worst thing that could happen happened to you now. And now once you get past this, you're going to be able to keep going." And it's true. So I think that it goes along with the psychological toughness, but this whole idea that it is, a very long and winding road with there's no guarantee of success anywhere. There's no guarantee any one thing will be a success. The thing you said before about like a creative life, that's another thing I've learned, is that over the years, is that what I really wanted was a life in writing. I didn't want to have X amount of awards, I'll take all the awards and all the money and all the fame I can get. Who wouldn't? But, I get to live a life in writing, day in and day out. And how many people get that privilege? How many people are that lucky? And so that's something else I remind myself on the days where, it's like, got a bunch of bad reviews today, or, got a story rejection today. So I think that you need to tend to the mental and emotional part as much as anything else. There's a psychotherapist and a writer. His name's Eric Meisel. His last name's spelled Maisel. He specializes in therapy with creative people and helping them through all the mental and emotional aspects of it. And he's a writer himself in terms of like not only nonfiction, but fiction and other stuff. So, I always tell people, look him up on Amazon or go to his website. He's got all kinds of books that deal with the mental and emotional aspects of writing. And I remember reading one of his books, Creativity for Life. And it was like this thick. And I read it and I'm like, this is 20 years of my damn life I learned And he's got it all in here about, I don't know how much that would have helped me. I've still had to live through it a lot. But I tell people, I told one of my writing classes today that if I was designing a graduate program in writing, I would have one class devoted to that book so that people could learn that part of it too. And a lot of that, I think, is people, they learn it on their own or they don't. They're afraid to talk about things that maybe scare them or worry them or setbacks they've had, because on social media, you don't want to show any weakness. You want to keep promoting yourself like you're awesome. So I think that that's something that I've learned along the way. And in the early days of social media on old-fashioned message boards, there were private areas where the professional writers, like if you belonged to HWA or SIFLA, could go. There, people shared that stuff, just like they would maybe at a bar at a convention. And I was so fortunate to be part of that, because that helped a lot too. But I think that's the kind of thing that I think people, the more you can learn about dealing with all the other stuff that comes along with writing, I think the more likely you are to persist.
Sure, that is terrific advice. And now I know what book I will be adding to my virtual cart later this evening. That sounds like a real good one to read.
He's got a bunch. So just, go through them and look and see which ones might speak to you. But Creativity for Life is a great, and it's for any kind of artist. It doesn't have to be just writers, for any kind of creative person.
Terrific. So last question for you. Sure. You have become quite prolific. So, you mentioned that you're working on the Writing in the Dark workbook, but what else might readers expect from you in the near future?
Well, in February, I have a tie-in novel that ties into the board game called Zombicide Invader. And that's, space warriors meeting, alien zombies. And that was a lot of fun to write. That's coming out in February. Writing in the Dark workbook, I'm not sure when, 2022 sometime. In July, I've got my next Flame Tree Press horror novel. It's called We Will Rise. Instead of a zombie apocalypse, it's a ghost apocalypse. All these ghosts rise up. And so, your friends and relatives are coming for you. And you got to try to survive.
That's more terrifying than that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. So hopefully people enjoy that one.
Oh, that's terrific. So, I don't know how you do all you do, and you teach as well and have a family. So I will let you get back to your evening and your writing, but thank you so much for taking time out to speak with me today. Hopefully people will pick up Halloween Kills and, of course, Writing in the Dark, which really is indispensable. So Tim Waggoner, thanks a bunch.
Oh, thanks for having me. I had a great time.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.